My heart nearly stopped when the morning sun illuminated something impossible at the bottom of our empty cattle pond. The ghostly outline of an overturned stagecoach that would reveal not only a fortune in lost gold rush treasure, but a deadly secret that a powerful mining dynasty had murdered to protect over 150 years ago. Before we dive into this incredible true story, drop a comment telling me what state you're watching from. And if tales of hidden treasure and dangerous family secrets captivate you, smash that subscribe button because next week's story involves a discovery that's even more shocking than this one. The summer of 2023 will forever be etched in my memory as the season that nearly destroyed everything my family had built over for generations. I'm Jake Morrison. My great-great-grandfather, William Morrison, established the Twin Eagles Ranch in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains back in 1889, just 20 years after the California gold rush had swept through our valley like a hurricane, leaving fortunes won and lost in its wake. Our 450-acre spread had been home to the Morrison family for 134 years. We'd survived the Great Depression when cattle prices plummeted and drought turned our pastures to dust. We'd endured 2 world wars, sending 3 generations of Morrison men off to fight while the women kept the ranch running. We'd weathered multiple droughts, flash floods, market crashes, and the constant pressure from developers wanting to turn our pristine mountain valley into another suburban sprawl with strip malls and housing developments. But nothing had prepared us for the financial crisis that hit us in 2023. It started on a crisp March morning when my father, Robert Morrison, suffered a massive heart attack while checking fence lines in the north pasture. I'll never forget the phone call from our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who'd seen Dad's truck parked in the same spot for 3 hours and decided to investigate. She found him collapsed beside the truck, his face gray, clutching his chest. At 68, Dad had been the backbone of our operation. He was one of those old-school ranchers who could fix anything with baling wire and duct tape, who knew every cow in our herd by sight, and who could predict weather patterns better than any meteorologist. He managed our 200 head of cattle, maintained our equipment with the precision of a master mechanic, and handled the business side of ranching that I'd never fully grasped despite growing up on the land. Dad survived, thank God. But his recovery meant months away from the ranch and medical bills that our modest cattle operation couldn't absorb. The triple bypass surgery alone cost $180,000, and that was just the beginning. Physical therapy, medications, follow-up appointments, and the specialized equipment he needed for his home recovery, it all added up faster than we could count. The ranch had always operated on thin margins. We weren't one of those massive corporate operations you see in Texas or Montana with tens of thousands of head of cattle and computerized feeding systems. We were what folks call a legacy ranch, a working family operation that stayed profitable through careful management, hard work, and an intimate knowledge of our land passed down through generations. My great-great-grandfather William had started with just 80 acres and 30 head of cattle. Over the decades, each generation had slowly expanded the operation, adding acreage when neighboring ranchers retired or faced their own financial troubles. By the time my grandfather Thomas took over in the 1950s, we had grown to 300 acres. My father Robert had added another 150 acres in the 1980s, taking on debt that had taken him 20 years to pay off. Every acre of our land told a story. South pasture, where we ran our breeding stock, had been added in 1963 when old Henrik Larson decided to sell and move to town. The East Meadow, perfect for our hay operation, came to us in 1981 when the Kowalski family faced bankruptcy after a series of brutal winters killed half their herd. The North Range, with its stunning views of the Sierra Peaks, had been the final piece of the puzzle, acquired in 1987 when my father took on what seemed like an enormous risk at the time. But legacy doesn't pay medical bills or equipment loans, and by June 2023, we were facing a perfect storm of financial. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her touch was warm and familiar, a comfort I'd relied on through 14 years of marriage. Then we need a miracle, Jake, because I've run the numbers a dozen times, without selling part of the land. We don't have enough collateral for a loan extension. And even if we could get an extension, we'd still need to replace the equipment and cover Dad's ongoing medical expenses. She pulled out a fresh spreadsheet, one I'd seen too, many times already. Look, if we sell just the North Range to Patterson 120 acres, we could pay off the balloon payment and have enough left over to replace the equipment. We'd still have 330 acres, which is plenty for a smaller operation. I studied the numbers, but my heart wasn't in it. The North Range wasn't just acreage. It was the most beautiful part of our property, with sweeping views of the valley and the Sierra Peaks. It was where I'd learned to ride, where I'd brought Sarah on our first date, where we'd taught our kids to love the land. Feel like cutting off a limb. It's when my younger brother Danny called with news that would change everything, though not in the way any of us expected. Danny had always been the smart one in the family. I'd stayed on the ranch after high school, learning the business from Dad. Danny had gone to UC Davis for a degree in hydrology and then to graduate school at Colorado State. He'd worked for the state water department for 8 years, specializing in groundwater management and spring systems throughout the Sierra Nevada region. At 29, Danny was everything I wasn't scientifically minded. Comfortable with technology and able to see patterns in data that completely escaped me. But he also understood the ranch in ways that his education had enhanced rather than replaced. He knew the land not just as a scientist, but as a Morrison who'd grown up fishing in Willowbrook Pond and helping with cattle roundups. When he arrived at the ranch the next morning, his expression was grim. He climbed out of his state-issued pickup truck loaded with testing equipment, wearing his official Department of Water Resources uniform and carrying a clipboard thick with data sheets. "Jake, I need to show you something," he said, leading me toward Willowbrook Pond with his testing equipment. "I've been tracking the spring flow rates as part of a regional groundwater study. There's been a significant decline over the past 6 months. I think we might be looking at a geological shift that could affect the pond's long-term viability." We walked along the familiar path that led from our house to the pond, a route I'd traveled thousands of times over the years. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the earthy smell of the pond. Birds were singing in the oak trees, and I could hear the gentle lapping of water against the shore. We stood at the edge of the water where my grandfather's wooden dock extended about 15 feet from shore. The dock was showing its age. The planks were weathered gray, and a few were starting to sag, but it was still structurally sound. I'd been meaning to replace some of the boards, but like everything else, dock maintenance had been pushed aside by more pressing concerns. The pond had always been roughly circular, about 200 feet across at its widest point, with depths reaching nearly 20 feet in the center where the spring bubbled up from underground limestone caverns. The water was so clear you could see the sandy bottom in the shallow areas near shore, and schools of trout that Dad had stocked over the years. Danny lowered his flow meter into the water near the spring source, a sophisticated electronic device that looked like a cross between a fishing rod and a scientific instrument. The spring itself was visible as a gentle upwelling in the center of the pond, a spot where the water moved differently, creating subtle ripples that radiated outward in perfect circles. After several minutes of measurements, he pulled the device up with a frown that deepened as he read the digital display. "Flow rate is down 40% from last year's measurements. Jake, I think the earthquake we had in February might have shifted. The underground channels, the spring might be in the process of relocating." I remembered that earthquake of 4.8 magnitude tremor that had rattled dishes in our kitchen and spooked the cattle for a few days. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her touch was warm and familiar, a comfort I'd relied on through 14 years of marriage. "Then we need a miracle, Jake, because I've run the numbers a dozen times, without selling part of the land. We don't have enough collateral for a loan extension. And even if we could get an extension, we'd still need to replace the equipment and cover Dad's ongoing medical expenses." She pulled out a fresh spreadsheet, one I'd seen too, many times already. "Look, if we sell just the North Range to Patterson 120 acres, we could pay off the balloon payment and have enough left over to replace the equipment. We'd still have 330 acres, which is plenty for a smaller operation." I studied the numbers, but my heart wasn't in it. The North Range wasn't just acreage. It was the most beautiful part of our property, with sweeping views of the valley and the Sierra Peaks. It was where I'd learned to ride, where I'd brought Sarah on our first date, where we'd taught our kids to love the land. Feel like cutting off a limb. It's when my younger brother Danny called with news that would change everything, though not in the way any of us expected. Danny had always been the smart one in the family, while I'd stayed on the ranch after high school, learning the business from Dad. Danny had gone to UC Davis for a degree in hydrology and then to graduate school at Colorado State. He'd worked for the state water department for 8 years, specializing in groundwater management and spring systems throughout the Sierra Nevada region. At 29, Danny was everything I wasn't scientifically minded. Comfortable with technology and able to see patterns in data that completely escaped me. But he also understood the ranch in ways that his education had enhanced rather than replaced. He knew the land not just as a scientist, but as a Morrison who'd grown up fishing in Willowbrook Pond and helping with cattle roundups. When he arrived at the ranch the next morning, his expression was grim. He climbed out of his state-issued pickup truck loaded with testing equipment, wearing his official Department of Water Resources uniform and carrying a clipboard thick with data sheets. "Jake, I need to show you something," he said, leading me toward Willowbrook Pond with his testing equipment. "I've been tracking the spring flow rates as part of a regional groundwater study. There's been a significant decline over the past 6 months. I think we might be looking at a geological shift that could affect the pond's long-term viability." We walked along the familiar path that led from our house to the pond, a route I'd traveled thousands of times over the years. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the earthy smell of the pond. Birds were singing in the oak trees, and I could hear the gentle lapping of water against the shore. We stood at the edge of the water where my grandfather's wooden dock extended about 15 feet from shore. The dock was showing its age. The planks were weathered gray, and a few were starting to sag, but it was still structurally sound. I'd been meaning to replace some of the boards, but like everything else, dock maintenance had been pushed aside by more pressing concerns. The pond had always been roughly circular, about 200 feet across at its widest point, with depths reaching nearly 20 feet in the center where the spring bubbled up from underground limestone caverns. The water was so clear you could see the sandy bottom in the shallow areas near shore, and schools of trout that Dad had stocked over the years. Danny lowered his flow meter into the water near the spring source, a sophisticated electronic device that looked like a cross between a fishing rod and a scientific instrument. The spring itself was visible as a gentle upwelling in the center of the pond, a spot where the water moved differently, creating subtle ripples that radiated outward in perfect circles. After several minutes of measurements, he pulled the device up with a frown that deepened as he read the digital display. "Flow rate is down 40% from last year's measurements. Jake, I think the earthquake we had in February might have shifted. The underground channels, the spring might be in the process of relocating." I remembered that earthquake of 4.8 magnitude tremor that had rattled dishes in our kitchen and spooked the cattle for a few days. It hadn't seemed like a big deal at the time, just another minor seismic event in a region that experienced them regularly. But apparently, even small earthquakes could have major consequences for underground water systems. The implications hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Without the spring, Willowbrook Pond would eventually become nothing more than a seasonal puddle, filling with rainwater in winter and drying up during summer months. Our cattle operation depended on that reliable water source, especially during dry summer months, when the creek that ran along our eastern boundary often reduced to a trickle. More than that, the pond was a major factor in our property's value. Real estate appraisers had always cited the natural spring-fed pond as one of our ranch's most valuable features. If the spring died, our land would lose a significant portion of its appeal to any potential buyers, including Patterson Development. "How long do we have?" I asked, dreading the answer. Sarah, August 15th, 2023, dawned clear and hot, with temperatures already climbing toward what the Weather Service predicted would be another scorching day above 95 degrees. I stood at my kitchen window at 5:30 a.m., drinking coffee and watching the sun paint the Sierra Nevada peaks gold and pink, knowing this would be the last morning I'd see Willowbrook Pond as it had existed for over a century. The pumping equipment had arrived the previous afternoon, a convoy of trucks carrying industrial pumps, generators, miles of heavy-duty hose that would transform our peaceful ranch into something resembling a construction site. Rodriguez. Brothers Water Management, the company Danny had recommended, specialized in agricultural pond maintenance and had assured us they could drain our 3-acre pond in approximately 18 hours. Miguel Rodriguez, the company's owner, was a third-generation water management specialist whose grandfather had helped build irrigation systems throughout the Central Valley during the 1940s, when he'd surveyed our pond the week before. His weathered hands had traced the shoreline with the confidence of someone who understood water in all its forms. "Beautiful setup you have here," he'd told us, admiring the crystal-clear spring water and the ancient oak trees. "In 40 years of this business, I've seen a lot of ponds, but this one's special. You can feel the history in a place like this." His words had both comforted and terrified me. Yes, the pond was special. That's exactly why the thought of draining it felt like sacrilege. But Miguel had also assured us that if we could solve the spring flow problem, we could restore the pond to even better condition than before. Sarah appeared beside me at the window, her arms slipping around my waist, in the unconscious gesture of comfort that had sustained us through 14 years of marriage. She was already dressed for the day in work clothes, old jeans, a faded UC Davis t-shirt from her college days, and boots that had seen countless ranch chores. "Second thoughts?" she asked quietly, though her tone suggested she'd support whatever decision I made. "About 100 of them," I admitted. "But Danny's right. If we don't understand what's happening to the spring, we're just delaying the inevitable. At least this way, we're taking action instead of just watching our water source disappear." Our children, Emma and Tyler, had been staying with Sarah's parents in Sacramento for the past week. We decided it was better for them to be away during the draining process, partly to keep them safe around the heavy machinery, but mostly because we weren't sure how emotional this was going to be for Sarah and me. Emma, at 12, was old enough to understand the financial pressures we faced. But Tyler, at 8, just knew that something was wrong with his favorite fishing spot. "When can we go fishing again, Dad?" he'd asked before leaving for his grandparents. House, his young face serious with concern. "Soon, buddy," I'd promised, hoping it was true. Danny arrived at 6 a.m. sharp, his state truck loaded with geological survey equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic sensors, water chemistry test kits, and GPS mapping devices filled the truck bed. He'd taken vacation time to oversee the survey personally, a gesture that meant more to me than I could express. At 29, Danny had always been the analytical one in our family. Where I saw a pond, he saw a complex hydrological system with underground limestone channels, aquifer pressures, and geological formations that told stories spanning thousands of years. His scientific training had given him tools to understand our land in ways that complemented rather than replaced the practical knowledge our family had accumulated over 4 generations. "Morning, Jake," he said, climbing out of his truck with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely excited about the work ahead. "Perfect day for this. Weather's stable, no wind to speak of, and I've got permission to use some pretty sophisticated equipment that the state doesn't usually loan out for private projects." Miguel and his crew arrived at 6:30, their trucks rumbling down our driveway like a small military convoy. 3 pumps, each the size of a washing machine, were unloaded with the precision of a well-rehearsed operation. Were arranged in careful coils. 2 massive generators were positioned upwind from the house to minimize noise and exhaust fumes. "We'll start pumping at 7 o'clock, Miguel explained, reviewing his plan one final time. "First pump draws from the deepest part near the spring source. Second pump handles the middle depths. Third pump cleans up the shallows. We'll discharge the water into your irrigation system and the overflow channels you've prepared in the east pasture. The water from our pond wouldn't be wasted." Over the past week, Sarah and I had worked with our neighbor, Tom Chen, to create temporary irrigation channels that would carry the pond water to drought-stressed areas of both our ranches. It felt better knowing that every gallon would serve a purpose, even as we emptied the heart of our property. My father arrived at 7:15, moving slowly but insisting on being present for this historic moment. His recovery from the heart attack had been remarkable, but he tired easily and still needed to be careful about physical exertion. He settled into a lawn chair we'd positioned in the shade of the largest oak tree, where he could observe the operation without getting in the way. "Never thought I'd see this day," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the pond that had been the centerpiece of his life for nearly 70 years. My father used to tell stories about helping his grandfather dig irrigation. August 15th, 2023, dawned clear and hot, with temperatures already climbing toward what the weather service predicted would be another scorching day above 95 degrees. I stood at my kitchen window at 5:30 a.m., drinking coffee and watching the sun paint the Sierra Nevada peaks gold and pink, knowing this would be the last morning I'd see Willowbrook Pond as it had existed for over a century. The pumping equipment had arrived the previous afternoon, a convoy of trucks carrying industrial pumps, generators, miles of heavy-duty hose that would transform our peaceful ranch into something resembling a construction site. Rodriguez Brothers Water Management, the company Danny had recommended, specialized in agricultural pond maintenance and had assured us they could drain our 3-acre pond in approximately 18 hours. Miguel Rodriguez, the company's owner, was a third-generation water management specialist whose grandfather had helped build irrigation systems throughout the Central Valley during the 1940s, when he'd surveyed our pond the week before. His weathered hands had traced the shoreline with the confidence of someone who understood water in all its forms. "Beautiful setup you have here," he'd told us, admiring the crystal-clear spring water and the ancient oak trees. "In 40 years of this business, I've seen a lot of ponds, but this one's special. You can feel the history in a place like this." His words had both comforted and terrified me. Yes, the pond was special. That's exactly why the thought of draining it felt like sacrilege. But Miguel had also assured us that if we could solve the spring flow problem, we could restore the pond to even better condition than before. Sarah appeared beside me at the window, her arms slipping around my waist, in the unconscious gesture of comfort that had sustained us through 14 years of marriage. She was already dressed for the day in work clothes, old jeans, a faded UC Davis t-shirt from her college days, and boots that had seen countless ranch chores. "Second thoughts?" she asked quietly, though her tone suggested she'd support whatever decision I made. "About 100 of them," I admitted. "But Danny's right. If we don't understand what's happening to the spring, we're just delaying the inevitable. At least this way, we're taking action instead of just watching our water source disappear." Our children, Emma and Tyler, had been staying with Sarah's parents in Sacramento for the past week. We decided it was better for them to be away during the draining process, partly to keep them safe around the heavy machinery, but mostly because we weren't sure how emotional this was going to be for Sarah and me. Emma, at 12, was old enough to understand the financial pressures we faced, but Tyler, at 8, just knew that something was wrong with his favorite fishing spot. "When can we go fishing again, Dad?" he'd asked before leaving for his grandparents. House, his young face serious with concern. "Soon, buddy," I'd promised, hoping it was true. Danny arrived at 6 a.m. sharp, his state truck loaded with geological survey equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. "Ground-penetrating radar." "Probably just some old ranch equipment," I said, though the box felt heavier than its size suggested. "Dad, do you remember anything like this being in the pond?" My father studied the box with interest, his weathered hands tracing its contours. With the careful attention of someone who had worked with metal equipment for decades, never seen it before, but that doesn't mean much. "This pond's been here longer than I have. Could be something my father or grandfather lost overboard years ago," but his expression suggested he was as puzzled as I was. In 70 years of living on this ranch, he'd never seen anything like this metal box. And if it had been ranch equipment, why would it have been in the deepest part of the pond? We set the box aside and continued watching the water level drop. By noon, the pond was half empty, and more objects were becoming visible in the receding water. What appeared to be pieces of old wooden machinery, corroded metal fittings, and several more metal boxes of various sizes dotted the exposed pond bottom like artifacts in an archaeological dig. The wooden pieces were particularly intriguing. They weren't the rough-hewn lumber you'd expect from farm equipment, but carefully crafted pieces with joints and metalwork that suggested skilled craftsmanship. Some pieces showed evidence of paint or varnish that had somehow survived their underwater storage. It's protected by layers of sediment and the pond's consistent temperature. "There's definitely something down there," Miguel observed during his lunch break, wiping sweat from his forehead as he surveyed the partially drained pond. "In my experience, this much old equipment usually means someone was using the pond for storage at some point. Maybe during one of the droughts, when the water level was naturally low." His theory made sense from a practical standpoint. During severe droughts, the pond's water level would drop significantly, exposing large areas of the bottom. If someone had needed to hide valuable equipment or supplies, the pond would have provided an excellent temporary storage facility that would be completely concealed when the water level returned to normal. But the sheer volume of material was puzzling. These weren't just a few pieces of equipment hastily hidden during an emergency. The objects appeared to be arranged in patterns that suggested systematic, deliberate placement, as if someone had carefully planned their underwater storage. Danny's geological survey was producing increasingly interesting results. His ground-penetrating radar had identified the underground limestone caves that fed the spring, and he was mapping their extent with the precision of an archaeologist. The cave system was larger than anyone had imagined, extending well beyond the boundaries of the pond itself. "Jake, look at this," he said, showing me a three-dimensional image on his tablet that looked like something from a medical scan. "The main cave system runs southeast for almost 300 yards, just like I predicted. But there are also smaller channels, running north and west. It's like an underground river system with multiple tributaries." The image was remarkable, a hidden world beneath our ranch that none of us had ever suspected. The limestone caves formed an intricate network of channels and chambers, some large enough for a person to crawl through, others no bigger than drainage pipes. The spring that fed our pond was just one outlet of this extensive underground system. "This explains why your spring has been so reliable over the years," Danny continued. "Even during severe droughts, this underground system would continue providing water. But the earthquake shifted some of the flow patterns, redirecting water that used to feed your pond toward other outlets. By 2 p.m., the water level had dropped to just 3 feet in the deepest areas, and the scope of what lay beneath our family pond was becoming clear. This wasn't just some old ranch equipment that had accidentally fallen into the water. The objects were arranged in patterns that suggested deliberate placement, as if someone had used the pond as an underwater storage facility. Most intriguing was what appeared to be the outline of a large wooden structure near the deepest part of the pond, close to the spring source. As more water was pumped away, the structure's shape became increasingly distinct curved wooden beams that formed what looked like the framework of something much larger than farm equipment. The wooden structure was oriented lengthwise across the deepest part of the pond, positioned as if it had been carefully placed to take advantage of the maximum water depth for concealment. The wood appeared to be remarkably well preserved, protected by the cold spring water and layers of sediment that had accumulated over the decades. "Miguel, how much longer until we can walk on the bottom?" I asked, my curiosity about the mysterious structure overwhelming my patience. "Another 3 hours, maybe 4, he replied, checking the water flow through his pumps. "But we can start exploring the shallow areas now if you want. Just be careful, the mud can be deeper than it looks, and there might be more objects hidden beneath the sediment." Sarah and I exchanged glances. We'd committed to this process for geological reasons, but the mysterious objects in our pond were creating a level of intrigue we hadn't anticipated. What had seemed like a straightforward geological survey was beginning to feel like an archaeological excavation. Danny was equally fascinated. His scientific training kicked into high gear as he documented every visible object with photographs and measurements. "This is unprecedented," he said, adjusting his camera settings to capture the underwater artifacts in the afternoon light. "I've surveyed dozens of natural ponds throughout the Sierra Nevada, and I've never seen anything like this level of human-made materials. Someone was definitely using this pond for long-term storage." He began taking water samples from around each visible object, testing for minerals and chemical signatures that might provide clues about when the materials had been submerged. "If I can analyze the sediment layers and water chemistry, I might be able to determine how long these objects have been underwater," he explained. As the afternoon wore on, The mysterious wooden structure continued to emerge from the receding water like some ancient beast rising from the depths. By 4 p.m., it was clear that we were looking at something much more significant than old farm equipment. The curved wooden beams formed a distinctive shape that sent a chill through me when I finally recognized what we were seeing. The structure was clearly the frame of some kind of vehicle, long and narrow, with curved supports that suggested wheels and a passenger compartment. The craftsmanship was evident even in its waterlogged state, with joinery techniques and metalwork that spoke of 19th century manufacturing. "Sarah, does that look like what I think it looks like?" I asked, pointing toward the now partially exposed structure. She studied it for a long moment, her expression shifting from curiosity to amazement. As a teacher, she'd studied California history extensively, and she recognized the distinctive shape before I did. "Jake, that looks like, is that a stagecoach?" The word hung in the air between us, laden with implications that none of us had anticipated when we decided to drain our pond. A stagecoach in our pond meant this wasn't just old ranch equipment or mining supplies. This was potentially a piece of California gold rush history that had been hidden beneath our water for over 150 years. Danny immediately focused his attention on the wooden structure, taking detailed photographs and measurements with the precision of a forensic investigator. "The dimensions are right," he confirmed after several minutes of careful examination. "Length approximately 12 feet, width about 6 feet. The curved wooden pieces could definitely be the framework of a 19th century stagecoach." He pulled out a measuring tape and began documenting every visible detail. "The wheel mounts are here and here," he said, pointing to metal fittings partially buried in the sediment. "The passenger compartment would have been in this section, and what looks like the driver's seat area is at this end." My father, who had been observing quietly from his chair under the oak tree, suddenly became more animated. "I'll be damned," he said slowly, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and recognition. "You know, my grandfather used to tell stories about finding old mining equipment around the property when he was a boy. Said there were rumors about prospectors hiding things during the gold rush, but I always figured they were just tall tales." He struggled to his feet, his curiosity overcoming his need to rest. "Robert Morrison, my grandfather, used to say that sometimes when they were digging fence post holes or irrigation channels, they'd find pieces of old equipment that didn't make sense. Things that were too fancy for ranch work, too old to be from their time." Implications of his words were staggering. If our family had been finding gold rush artifacts on our property for generations, then the stagecoach in our pond might be just one piece of a much larger historical puzzle. By 5 p.m., the pumps had removed enough water to reveal the full outline of what was unmistakably a stagecoach, lying on its side in the deepest part of the pond. The wooden structure was remarkably well preserved. The cold spring water and protective layers of sediment had created nearly perfect preservation conditions. The stagecoach appeared to have been deliberately positioned, not accidentally lost. It was oriented parallel to the longest axis of the pond, suggesting someone had carefully maneuvered it into position for maximum concealment when the water level was high. But it was what we could see inside the stagecoach that made my hands tremble with excitement and disbelief. Through gaps in the wooden framework, metal objects were clearly visible, not rusted farm equipment, but what appeared to be intact. Strong boxes and containers that had been protected from the elements by their underwater storage. The strong boxes were stacked inside the overturned stagecoach-like cargo that had been carefully loaded for transport. Even after more than a century underwater, the metal containers appeared to be structurally sound, their contents presumably protected by the same conditions that had preserved the wooden vehicle. "This changes everything," Danny said. "The stagecoach appeared to have been deliberately positioned, not accidentally lost. It was oriented parallel to the longest axis of the pond, suggesting someone had carefully maneuvered it into position for maximum concealment when the water level was high. But it was what we could see inside the stagecoach that made my hands tremble with excitement and disbelief. Through gaps in the wooden framework, metal objects were clearly visible, not rusted farm equipment, but what appeared to be intact. Strong boxes and containers that had been protected from the elements by their underwater storage. The strong boxes were stacked inside the overturned stagecoach-like cargo that had been carefully loaded for transport. Even after more than a century underwater, the metal containers appeared to be structurally sound, their contents presumably protected by the same conditions that had preserved the wooden vehicle. "This changes everything," Danny said quietly, his scientific objectivity giving way to genuine awe. "Jake, if this is what I think it is, we're not just looking at old ranch equipment. We might be looking at a piece of California gold rush history that's been hidden under your pond for over 150 years. The weight of his words settled over us like a heavy blanket. If the stagecoach and its contents were indeed from the gold rush era, we weren't just dealing with a geological survey anymore. We were potentially sitting on a historical discovery of immense significance and value. But even as excitement coursed through me, a nagging worry began to form in the back of my mind. Historical discoveries of this magnitude didn't stay secret for long. Once word got out about what we'd found, our quiet ranch would become the center of attention from historians, treasure hunters, government agencies, and who knows what other interested parties. As evening approached, and the last of the water was pumped from Willowbrook Pond, our family ranch had been transformed from a struggling cattle operation into the site of what appeared to be a major historical discovery. The financial crisis that had forced us to drain our beloved pond had revealed secrets that no one could have anticipated. Standing at the edge of the empty pond as the sun set behind the Sierra Nevada peaks, I realized that our desperate attempt to understand a failing spring had uncovered something that would change our lives forever. The stagecoach lay revealed. In the growing darkness, its wooden framework casting long shadows across the muddy pond bottom, waiting to tell us secrets that had been hidden beneath the water for more than a century. Miguel and his crew began the process of securing their equipment for the night. But they moved with the careful attention of people who understood they were working around something historically significant. "We'll leave the pumps in place overnight," Miguel told me, "just in case any groundwater seepage starts filling the pond again. Tomorrow, we can start the detailed examination of your spring source."
Ow.
But I knew that tomorrow our focus would be split between the geological survey and the incredible discovery lying exposed on our pond bottom. The stagecoach and its mysterious cargo had already captured all of our attention, and I suspected that understanding its story would become our primary obsession. Danny packed his equipment carefully, promising to return first thing in the morning with additional documentation tools. "Jake, we need to be very careful about how we handle this," he cautioned. "If this really is a gold rush artifact, there could be legal implications about ownership, historical preservation, maybe even government involvement, as I would learn." In the days to come, Danny's warning was more prescient than any of us realized. Some secrets carry dangers that the people who buried them never intended, and some discoveries attract the attention of forces far more powerful than a struggling ranch family could ever imagine. The pond was empty, the spring source was exposed, and our family's greatest challenge was about to begin. When things don't go as planned, the morning of August 16th arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to mirror the uncertainty now hanging over our ranch. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with questions about the stagecoach and its contents lying exposed in our empty pond. Every time I'd closed my eyes, I'd seen those metal strongboxes glinting in the afternoon sun, promising answers to mysteries I didn't even know how to ask about. Sarah was already awake when I rolled out of bed at 5 a.m., sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee and her laptop open. She'd been researching California gold rush history until well past midnight, trying to understand what we might have discovered. "Jake, look at this," she said, turning the laptop screen toward me. She'd found a digitized newspaper article from the Sacramento Daily Union, dated September 15, 1857. The headline read, "Stage robbery near Nevada City Wells Fargo shipment missing." I leaned over her shoulder to read the article, the coffee in my hand growing cold as the implications became clear. The article described a Wells Fargo stagecoach carrying gold and currency from the mining camps that had disappeared between Nevada City and Sacramento. The coach, passengers, and driver had simply vanished, leaving no trace except for wheel tracks that ended abruptly at a creek crossing. "The timing could be right," Sarah said quietly. "And look at this description of the missing coach," I read. and black Concorde-style stagecoach manufactured by Abbott Downing Company, carrying strong boxes containing approximately $50,000 in gold coins and dust, plus banking documents and private letters. $50,000 in 1857 would be worth well over $1 million today. But that wasn't what made my hands shake as I read the article. It was the description of the stagecoach itself, the manufacturer, the color scheme, even the specific type of strongboxes that matched what we'd seen partially exposed in our pond. "Sarah, we need to call Danny immediately," I said, reaching for my phone. "If this is the missing Wells Fargo coach, we're not just dealing with a historical curiosity anymore. We might be sitting on one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in California history." But before I could, the stagecoach appeared to have been deliberately positioned, not accidentally lost. It was oriented parallel to the longest axis of the pond, suggesting someone had carefully maneuvered it into position for maximum concealment when the water level was high. But it was what we could see inside the stagecoach that made my hands tremble with excitement and disbelief. Through gaps in the wooden framework, metal objects were clearly visible, not rusted farm equipment, but what appeared to be intact. Strong boxes and containers that had been protected from the elements by their underwater storage. The strong boxes were stacked inside the overturned stagecoach-like cargo that had been carefully loaded for transport. Even after more than a century underwater, the metal containers appeared to be structurally sound, their contents presumably protected by the same conditions that had preserved the wooden vehicle. "This changes everything," Danny said quietly, his scientific objectivity giving way to genuine awe. "Jake, if this is what I think it is, we're not just looking at old ranch equipment. We might be looking at a piece of California gold rush history that's been hidden under your pond for over 150 years. The weight of his words settled over us like a heavy blanket. If the stagecoach and its contents were indeed from the gold rush era, we weren't just dealing with a geological survey anymore. We were potentially sitting on a historical discovery of immense significance and value. But even as excitement coursed through me, a nagging worry began to form in the back of my mind. Historical discoveries of this magnitude didn't stay secret for long. Once word got out about what we'd found, our quiet ranch would become the center of attention from historians, treasure hunters, government agencies, and who knows what other interested parties. As evening approached and the last of the water was pumped from Willowbrook Pond, our family ranch had been transformed from a struggling cattle operation into the site of what appeared to be a major historical discovery. The financial crisis that had forced us to drain our beloved pond had revealed secrets that no one could have anticipated. Standing at the edge of the empty pond as the sun set behind the Sierra Nevada peaks, I realized that our desperate attempt to understand a failing spring had uncovered something that would change our lives forever. The stagecoach lay revealed. In the growing darkness, its wooden framework casting long shadows across the muddy pond bottom, waiting to tell us secrets that had been hidden beneath the water for more than a century. Miguel and his crew began. Archaeological discoveries of this potential magnitude generate interest quickly. Dr. Sterling replied diplomatically. My office was contacted by the California Historical Preservation Society early this morning. They expressed concerns about preservation and requested state oversight. The pieces were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. Somehow, news of our discovery had leaked to organizations in San Francisco within hours of our finding the stagecoach. And now we had official state representatives on our property before we'd even had a chance to fully examine what we'd found. Dr. Sterling, this is our family's private property, Sarah said firmly. We're being responsible about documenting our discovery. My brother-in-law is a state hydrologist, and we've been careful to preserve everything properly. Appreciate that, Mrs. Morrison, Dr. Sterling replied. But if this is indeed a Gold Rush-era stagecoach, it may qualify as a site of statewide historical significance. That designation comes with certain protections and requirements that supersede private property rights. The implications of her words hit me like a physical blow. Our family ranch, our financial crisis, our plans to restore the spring, all of it could be swept aside if the state decided our property was too historically significant for us to manage independently. Danny looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was heading. Dr. Sterling, I want to emphasize that the Morrison family has been completely cooperative and responsible. They contacted me immediately when they realized the significance of their discovery. Of course, Dr. Sterling nodded. I'm not suggesting any wrongdoing, but the state has protocols for situations like this. I need to conduct a preliminary assessment and file a report with the Archaeological Commission. Depending on what I find, we may need to implement protective measures. As we walked toward the empty pond, I caught Danny's arm. How did the Historical Preservation Society know to contact your office? I whispered. His expression was troubled. I don't know, Jake. I haven't filed any reports yet. This morning was supposed to be my initial assessment. Someone else had. To have contacted them, the thought that someone had been watching our property or monitoring our activities was deeply unsettling. But who would have that kind of information network, and why would they be interested in our family ranch? At the pond, Dr. Sterling's professional demeanor shifted to genuine amazement as she saw the exposed stagecoach. She immediately began taking photographs and measurements, her documentation process far more extensive than Danny's had been. This is remarkable, she murmured, crouching beside the wooden framework. Mr. Preservation is extraordinary. Mr. Morrison, do you have any family history that might explain how this came to be in your pond? Nothing specific, I replied. My great-grandfather mentioned finding old mining equipment occasionally, but nothing like this. Dr. Sterling was particularly interested in the strong boxes visible inside the stagecoach. These containers appear to be intact. If they contain original gold rush materials, this could be one of the most significant archaeological finds in California in decades. Mr. Morrison, I need to be clear about the legal situation. If preliminary examination confirms this is a historically significant site, the State Archaeological Commission has the authority to place it under protective designation. That would mean restricted access while proper excavation and documentation are completed. How long would that take? Sarah asked. Depending on the scope of the find, anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, Dr. Sterling replied. But the commission also provides compensation for private property owners whose land is designated for archaeological research. 2 years. The timeline that could destroy our ranch operations and guarantee we'd lose the property to Patterson Development? Even with state compensation, we couldn't survive having our land tied up in archaeological bureaucracy for that long. As Dr. Sterling continued her examination, Miguel Rodriguez arrived to check on his pumping equipment. But instead of his usual crew, he was accompanied by his son Carlos, a recent college graduate who worked part-time for the family business. Mr. Morrison, Miguel said quietly, pulling me aside. Carlos, tell him what you told me. The young man looked nervous but determined. Sir, last night after we left, I was telling my girlfriend about the stagecoach we found in your pond. She posted about it on social media, just a Facebook status saying her boyfriend had found something cool at work. My heart sank. Social media. In the age of instant communication, our secret had been broadcast to the world before we'd even understood what we'd discovered. Within an hour, Carlos continued, she had messages from people asking for details, wanting to know the exact location. Some of them seemed really serious, like they knew a lot about historical artifacts. One guy even offered her money for more information. What kind of information? Danny asked, overhearing the conversation. GPS coordinates, photos, whether we'd found anything inside the stagecoach. He said he was a collector, and this kind of discovery was extremely valuable to the right people. The situation was spiraling out of control faster than I could process. Our family's private discovery had become public knowledge, attracting attention from state agencies, historical societies, and now, apparently private collectors willing to pay for information. Dr. Sterling, who had been listening while continuing her documentation, looked up with concern. Mr. Morrison, this is exactly why state oversight is necessary. Significant archaeological sites often attract unwanted attention from treasure hunters and private collectors. Without proper protection, artifacts can be damaged or stolen. But her words felt more like a threat than reassurance. Protection seemed to mean losing control of our own property and potentially watching our ranch fail while bureaucrats decided what to do with our discovery. Around midday, the situation became even more complicated when a convoy of vehicles arrived at our ranch. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows, followed by a white panel van marked Apex Archaeological Services. The lead SUV discharged a woman in an expensive business suit who carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. She was tall, perhaps 50, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, and eyes that missed nothing as they surveyed our property. "Mr. Morrison," she called out, striding toward us with purposeful steps. "I'm Victoria Blackwood, director of the Blackwood Institute for Historical Research. I believe you've discovered something that belongs to my family." The name hit me like a physical blow, Blackwood. Sarah and I exchanged glances, both remembering the newspaper article she'd found that morning. The missing Wells Fargo stagecoach had been carrying a shipment belonging to the Blackwood Mining Company. "Ms. Blackwood," Dr. Sterling interjected, "this is a state archaeological site under official assessment. Private claims will need to be filed through proper channels." Victoria Blackwood's smile was cold and predatory. "Dr. Sterling, I appreciate the state's interest in proper documentation. The Blackwood Institute has been tracking this particular artifact for over 30 years. My great-great-grandfather's mining operation was the original owner of the cargo in that stagecoach." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder of documents, original shipping manifests, insurance claims, family correspondence, all documenting the Blackwood Company's ownership of the contents of that coach. When it disappeared in 1857, my family assumed it was lost forever. Danny stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. "Ms. Blackwood, how did you know where to find it? This discovery was only made yesterday." Her smile became even colder. Blackwood Institute maintains extensive research networks throughout California. When reports of significant gold rush discoveries surface, we investigate immediately. In this case, our research indicated this location had always been a high-probability site for the missing coach. The implication was clear they'd been watching our property, possibly for years, waiting for exactly this type of discovery. The thought that our family ranch had been under surveillance without our knowledge was deeply disturbing. "Mr. Morrison," Victoria continued, "I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for the artifacts. The Blackwood Institute specializes in preserving family historical legacies. We can ensure these items receive proper conservation while providing your family with substantial compensation." "How substantial?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested skepticism rather than interest. $5 million for complete transfer of ownership," Victoria replied without hesitation, "plus an additional $1 million for exclusive access rights during the recovery process." The figure was staggering enough to pay off all our debts, replace our equipment, and secure our ranch's future for generations. But something about Victoria Blackwood's demeanor made me deeply uneasy. She was too prepared, too knowledgeable, too eager to take possession of artifacts that technically hadn't even been properly excavated yet. Archaeological discoveries of this potential magnitude generate interest quickly. Dr. Sterling replied diplomatically. "My office was contacted by the California Historical Preservation Society early this morning. They expressed concerns about preservation." "Of course," Victoria replied smoothly. "The Blackwood Institute fully supports proper archaeological protocols. We're simply ensuring that when the time comes, the artifacts are preserved in an institution with the appropriate expertise and family connection to their history." As the day progressed, our ranch became increasingly crowded with interested parties. Representatives from 2 universities arrived seeking permission to conduct research. A team from the California Historical Society appeared with documentation equipment. Most disturbingly, several individuals in civilian clothes had positioned themselves at various vantage points around our property, claiming to be independent researchers but acting more like surveillance operatives. By evening, what had started as a family decision to repair our pond had transformed into a complex situation involving state agencies, private institutions, potential legal battles, and millions of dollars. Our quiet ranch had become the center of competing interests that all seemed to have claims on our discovery. As we sat on our back porch that night, watching the lights from various research teams working around our empty pond, Sarah voiced what we were both thinking. "Jake, I don't think this is just about historical preservation anymore. Victoria Blackwood didn't come here because of some social media post. She's been waiting for this discovery, and she knows more about what's in that stagecoach than she's telling us." I nodded, remembering the cold calculation in Victoria's eyes. "The question is, what exactly is she afraid we're going to find? And why is she so desperate to control it?" Danny joined us on the porch, carrying a laptop and looking frustrated. "I've been researching the Blackwood family history. Victoria Blackwood isn't just some historical enthusiast. She's the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, a company worth over $2 billion. They own mining operations, real estate developments, and apparently have significant political connections. The implications were staggering. We weren't just dealing with academic institutions and state bureaucracy. We'd somehow attracted the attention of a powerful family with vast resources and what appeared to be a personal stake in controlling our discovery." "There's something else," Danny continued. "I found references to other archaeological acquisitions by the Blackwood Institute. They seem to specialize in recovering artifacts related to their family history, but there are hints that their methods aren't always entirely legal or ethical." As if to emphasize his point, we noticed new lights positioned around the perimeter of our property, not the academic research teams working near the pond, but stationary surveillance equipment. That hadn't been there that morning. Our family's financial crisis had led us to drain a pond in hopes of saving our ranch. Instead, we'd uncovered a mystery that was attracting dangerous attention from forces we didn't understand. The stagecoach lying in our empty pond wasn't just a historical artifact, it was apparently the center of a conflict that had been building for over 150 years. And we were caught in the middle of it with our ranch, our family's legacy, potentially our safety hanging in the balance. The complication had become a crisis, and we had no idea how deep it would go or what we would need to do to protect everything we'd worked so hard to preserve. The central revelation, August 17th, dawned gray and ominous, with low clouds hanging over the Sierra Nevada peaks like a shroud. I'd spent most of the night awake, listening to the sounds of activity around our property as various research teams continued their work under floodlights. The peaceful ranch that had been home to for generations of Morrisons now resembled a combination archaeological dig and military encampment. Sarah was already up when I emerged from our bedroom at 5:30 a.m., standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee and a grim expression. "Jake, look at this," she said, handing me a folded newspaper. The front page of the Sacramento Bee carried a headline that made my stomach drop. "Gold Rush Treasure Discovered on Sierra Ranch Family Finds. Historic Stagecoach and Pond." Below the headline was an aerial photograph of our property clearly, taken from a helicopter or drone, showing the empty pond and the exposed stagecoach in perfect detail. "How did they get this photo?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Victoria Blackwood," Sarah replied grimly. "I saw a helicopter circling the property around midnight." By 3 a.m., this story was online. By 6 a.m., our phones started ringing with reporters, treasure hunters, and people claiming to be long-lost relatives of ours. As if summoned by her words, our landline rang again. I'd stopped answering after the 20th call, but the persistent ringing was becoming unbearable. Sarah had finally disconnected it around 4 a.m., but my cell phone continued buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Danny arrived at 6 a.m., looking as exhausted as I felt. "Jake, we need to talk." Privately. His expression was more serious than I'd ever seen it, and he kept glancing around as if he expected to be overheard. We walked to the old hay barn, far enough from the house and the pond to avoid the various researchers and technicians who were already beginning their morning activities. Danny pulled out his cell phone and showed me a series of text messages. "I've been getting these since 2 a.m., he said. "All from numbers I don't recognize, but they know things about me, about my work with the state, about our family." The messages were brief but chilling. "Your brother should be careful about what he digs up. Some family secrets are worth more than money. The Blackwood family protects what belongs to them. Consider this friendly advice. Sell now while you still can." My hands tightened into fists as I read the implied threats. "Danny, have you reported these to the police?" "That's the problem," he replied, running his hand through his hair in frustration. "I called Sheriff Martinez this morning. He told me that his department received a call from the FBI last night instructing them not to interfere with ongoing federal investigation activities at our ranch. The words hit me like ice water. Federal investigation. What federal investigation? Nobody will tell me, Danny said. But Jake, there are unmarked vehicles positioned at every access point to our property. When I tried to leave this morning to get coffee in town, I was politely but firmly asked to remain on the ranch for my own safety. The implications were staggering. Somehow, our family's discovery had triggered federal law enforcement involvement within 48 hours. We weren't just dealing with academic institutions and private collectors anymore. We were apparently at the center of something that the government considered a matter of national security. There's something else, Danny continued, lowering his voice even further. I managed to do some more research last night before they restricted our internet access. The Blackwood family isn't just wealthy, they have connections that go back generations. Political connections, law enforcement connections, connections to agencies that don't officially exist. Before I could respond, we heard the sound of heavy vehicles approaching the ranch. Through the barn doorway, I could see a convoy of black SUVs and a mobile command unit with satellite dishes pulling into our driveway. Mr. Morrison. The voice came from behind us, causing both Danny and me to spin around. A man in a dark suit had entered the barn without making a sound, a skill that suggested military or law enforcement training. I'm Agent David Chen, FBI, he said, displaying credentials that looked authentic. I need you and your family to come with me immediately. For your own protection. Protection from what? I demanded, though my voice betrayed more fear than authority. Agent Chen's expression was grim. Mr. Morrison, your discovery has attracted attention from individuals and organizations that pose a significant threat to your family's safety. The artifacts in your pond aren't just historically significant. They contain information that certain parties will kill to possess. The casual mention of killing made my blood run cold. What kind of information? I can't discuss operational details, but I can tell you that the missing stagecoach you've discovered was carrying more than gold. When it disappeared in 1857, it was transporting documents that could expose corruption and criminal activities involving some of California's most prominent founding families. As we walked back toward the house, Agent Chen explained the situation in terms that made my head spin. The FBI had been monitoring communications related to our discovery since the first social media post the previous evening. Multiple federal agencies were now involved, including the Treasury Department, the National Archives, and apparently some divisions of government that Agent Chen couldn't name. The Blackwood family has been searching for this stagecoach for over 30 years, he continued. Not because of the gold, but because of the documents it contains. Evidence that could destroy their family's reputation and potentially expose ongoing criminal enterprises. Sarah was waiting for us on the front porch, her face pale but determined. Jake, there are agents inside our house. They say they're securing evidence, but it feels more like they're taking over our home. Indeed, our kitchen and living room were filled with federal agents wearing FBI windbreakers, carefully documenting everything with cameras and measurement tools. Our family photographs, personal documents, even our children's school papers were being cataloged as if they might contain relevant evidence. Agent Chen, Sarah said firmly, we've been cooperative with everyone who's asked for access to our discovery. But this feels like an invasion. We haven't done anything wrong. Mrs. Morrison, you're absolutely right, Agent Chen replied with what seemed like genuine sympathy. Your family has done nothing wrong? You've accidentally uncovered evidence related to ongoing federal investigations that span multiple generations? For your own safety, we need to move you to a secure location while we sort this out. Before any of us could respond, the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the pond. Agent Chen immediately drew his weapon and spoke urgently into a radio headset. Shots fired, shots fired. All units respond to the pond area immediately. Through our kitchen window, I could see federal agents running toward the empty pond with weapons drawn. The various academic researchers who had been working around the stagecoach were being herded away from the area by additional agents. What's happening? Danny demanded. Agent Chen's expression was grim as he listened to radio chatter through his earpiece. Armed individuals attempted to access the artifacts. Our perimeter team engaged them, No federal agents injured, but we have multiple suspects in custody. The reality of our situation was becoming clear. We weren't just dealing with competing academic institutions or wealthy collectors. Our discovery had attracted the attention of people willing to use violence to obtain whatever was hidden in that stagecoach. Agent Chen, I said, I want to know what's in those strong boxes right now. Before we go anywhere or agree to anything else, my family deserves to understand what we've gotten ourselves into. He considered for a moment, then nodded. Mr. Morrison, you're right. Given the circumstances, you need to understand what you're dealing with. Let's go examine the artifacts together. The scene at the pond was like something from a war movie. Federal agents in tactical gear were positioned around the perimeter, while crime scene technicians processed evidence from what appeared to have been a brief but intense firefight. Bullet holes were visible in the oak trees, and several sections of our pond area were cordoned off with yellow tape. Dr. Sterling was still present, but now she was accompanied by agents from the National Archives and what Agent Chen described as document authentication specialists from Washington. The academic atmosphere of the previous day had been replaced by the efficient urgency of a federal crime scene. The strong boxes have been X-rayed, Agent Chen explained as we approached the stagecoach. They contain gold coins as expected, but also a large quantity of documents sealed in what appears to be waterproof containers. Based on the imaging, the documents are remarkably well preserved. A federal technician carefully extracted the first strongbox from the stagecoach using specialized lifting equipment. The metal container was larger than it had appeared from a distance roughly the size of a footlocker. With intricate metalwork that spoke of expensive 19th century craftsmanship, when the strongbox was opened under the careful supervision of the document specialists, the contents were breathtaking. Rows of gold coins, each one gleaming as if it had been minted yesterday. Stacks of gold dust in small leather pouches. But most significantly, several oiled leather document cases that had protected their contents from water damage for over 160 years. The gold is worth approximately $2 million at current market prices, one of the specialists informed us. But the historical value of the documents could be immeasurable. As the first document case was carefully opened, I caught a glimpse of handwritten papers covered in elegant 19th century script, legal documents, contracts, correspondence, bearing official seals and signatures that suggested government or high-level business involvement. Mr. Morrison, said Dr. Patricia Williams, the lead document specialist. These appeared to be original contracts and correspondence related to California land grants during the gold rush period. But more significantly, they include evidence of systematic fraud in the distribution of those grants. She carefully lifted a document with a wax seal, handling it with the reverence of someone touching a priceless artifact. This appears to be a contract between the Blackwood Mining Company and several California state officials, documenting payments made to secure exclusive mining rights on federal land that was supposed to be distributed to homesteaders. Implications were staggering. The missing stagecoach hadn't just been carrying gold. It had been transporting evidence of corruption at the highest levels of California's early government. There's more, Dr. Williams continued, examining additional documents. Correspondence between Blackwood representatives and federal land office officials. Documentation of bribes paid to judges and territorial administrators. Even evidence of violence committed against homesteaders who challenged illegitimate land claims. Agent Chen nodded grimly. The Blackwood family has been one of California's most politically connected families for over 150 years. If these documents are authentic, they provide evidence that their wealth and influence were built on fraud, corruption, and possibly murder. As more strong boxes were opened and their contents documented, the scope of the discovery became even more significant. Maps showing illegally claimed land grants. Financial records documenting bribes and payoffs. Personal correspondence describing threats and intimidation tactics. Even photographs and sketches showing mining operations on land that legally belonged to homesteading families. This isn't just historical corruption, Danny observed, studying one of the maps. Some of these land grants cover areas that are still owned by Blackwood Enterprises today. If the original claims were fraudulent, it could affect current property. ownership throughout Northern California. Dr. Williams nodded. These documents could potentially invalidate land titles worth billions of dollars in current market value. More importantly, they provide evidence of a pattern of criminal activity that appears to have continued across multiple generations. The second strongbox contained even more explosive materials. Personal letters from Jeremiah Blackwood, the company's founder, describing plans to eliminate troublesome homesteaders who challenged their land claims. Financial records showing payments to hired gunmen and corrupt sheriffs. Even detailed instructions for destroying evidence and intimidating witnesses. "My God," Sarah whispered, reading over my shoulder as Dr. Williams carefully displayed one. Of the letters, he's describing plans to murder families, entire families, just to steal their land. And according to these documents, Agent Chen added, those plans were carried out. We're looking at evidence of multiple murders committed to secure illegal land. Grants during the 1850s and 1860s. The third and final strongbox contained what appeared to be insurance documents. But as Dr. Williams examined them more carefully, their true significance became clear. "These aren't just insurance policies," she said, her voice filled with amazement. "They're documentation that the stagecoach robbery was staged. Jeremiah Blackwood arranged for his own coach to be stolen. To prevent these documents from reaching federal investigators in San Francisco, the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. In 1857, federal investigators had been closing in on the corruption surrounding California land grants. Jeremiah Blackwood, facing potential exposure and prosecution, had arranged for the evidence to disappear by staging a robbery of his own stagecoach. But why hide it in a pond? Danny asked. Why not just destroy the documents? Agent Chen smiled grimly. Insurance money? Blackwood collected on the stolen gold, plus he preserved the evidence as insurance against his co-conspirators. If any of the corrupt officials tried to betray him, he could produce documents proving their involvement. So this was always meant to be recovered, I realized. Jeremiah Blackwood hid this cash as leverage against his criminal partners, planning to retrieve it when the heat died down. But he never got the chance, Dr. Williams added. According to historical records, Jeremiah Blackwood died in a mining accident just 6 months after the stagecoach disappeared. The location of the hidden evidence died with him. As the morning progressed and more documents were carefully extracted and photographed, the full scope of the Blackwood family's criminal legacy became clear. The corruption wasn't limited to the Gold Rush-era documents showed that succeeding. Generations had continued the pattern of fraud, intimidation, and violence to protect and expand their illegally obtained wealth. This explains Victoria Blackwood's desperation to control your discovery, Agent Chen observed. These documents don't just expose historical crimes. They provide evidence that could be used to challenge current Blackwood landholdings and potentially expose ongoing criminal activities. The financial implications were staggering, but the personal implications were even more significant for our family. We had accidentally uncovered evidence that one of California's most powerful families had built their fortune on murder, and for Dan, they were apparently willing to kill again to prevent that evidence from becoming public. Agent Chen, I said, what happens to our ranch? What happens to our family? His expression was somber. Mr. Morrison, your family is now under federal protection. The evidence you've discovered makes you valuable witnesses in multiple ongoing investigations. But it also makes you targets for people who have killed to protect these secrets for over 150 years. As federal agents continued processing the crime scene from the morning shooting, I realized that our simple plan to repair our pond had uncovered one of the most significant criminal conspiracies in California history. The financial crisis that had threatened our ranch was now the least of our problems. We had discovered treasure beyond our wildest dreams, but we had also stumbled into a war that had been raging in secret for generations. And whether we wanted it or not, our family was now at the center of a battle between justice and a criminal empire that would stop at nothing to protect its secrets. The discovery that was supposed to save our ranch had instead thrust us into danger we never could have imagined. But it had also given us the power to expose crimes that had been hidden for over a century if we survived long enough to see justice served. 3 months later, I stood at the edge of our newly refilled Willowbrook Pond, watching the morning sun dance across water that once again reflected the ancient oak trees and Sierra Nevada peaks. But everything else about our ranch and our lives had changed in ways I never could have imagined when we'd made the desperate decision to drain our family's most precious landmark. The pond itself looked almost exactly as it had before we'd uncovered its secrets. Danny's geological survey had not only solved our spring flow problems, but had actually improved them. The underwater channels had been cleaned and redirected, and the spring now produced 30% more water than it had in decades. Our cattle operation was thriving. Our irrigation systems were the envy of the valley. Our financial crisis was a distant memory. But beneath that familiar surface lay something extraordinary, a purpose-built monument to justice that had transformed our ranch from a struggling cattle operation into something unprecedented in American history. The 3-month period following our discovery had been the most intense, terrifying, and ultimately transformative experience of our lives. Within 48 hours of opening those strong boxes, our family had been relocated to a secure federal facility, while teams of investigators, historians, and forensic specialists worked around the clock to authenticate and catalog the evidence we'd uncovered. The documents proved to be even more significant than anyone had initially realized. Dr. Patricia Williams and her team from the National Archives had spent weeks carefully preserving and digitizing every page, revealing a conspiracy that stretched far beyond the Blackwood family to include dozens of California's founding families, territorial officials, federal land office administrators, and even members of Congress. Mr. Morrison, Agent Chen, had told me during one of our weekly briefings, "Your discovery has provided evidence for the largest corruption investigation in American history. We're talking about fraud that affected the distribution of over 2 million acres of federal land and may have resulted in hundreds of murders." The investigation had moved with surprising speed. FBI's Public Corruption Unit had been building cases against various Blackwood enterprises for years. They'd lacked the historical evidence needed to challenge land titles and expose the foundation of the family's wealth. Our stagecoach had provided exactly what they needed. Victoria Blackwood had been arrested within a week of our discovery, charged with conspiracy, witness intimidation, and attempting to destroy federal evidence. Her arrest had triggered a cascade of additional arrests as investigators followed the evidence. Men hired by Blackwood associates to steal or destroy the strong boxes before federal agents could secure them. 2 had been captured immediately. The 3rd had died in the exchange of gunfire. All were connected to a private security firm that federal investigators discovered had been eliminating interests for decades. But the most shocking revelation had come when forensic accountants began tracing the financial connections revealed in the documents. The corruption exposed by Jeremiah Blackwood's insurance cash hadn't ended with the gold rush. It had evolved into a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had influenced California politics and business for over 150 years. The Blackwood family has been operating essentially as an organized crime syndicate disguised as a legitimate business empire. FBI Director Patricia Walsh had explained during a press conference that made international news. Evidence suggests they've been involved in murder, fraud, political corruption, environmental crimes, and witness intimidation spanning multiple generations. The legal implications were staggering. Over 400,000 acres of California land currently owned by Blackwood Enterprises and their subsidiary companies were found to be based on fraudulent original grants. The state of California filed suit to recover the illegally obtained property, while federal prosecutors prepared criminal cases against dozens of individuals connected to ongoing criminal activities. But perhaps most importantly, the investigation had uncovered evidence of recent crimes. Financial records found in the stagecoach had led investigators to discover that the Assista Black's Testament organization had been systematically intimidating and eliminating potential threats to their interests. Well, into the 21st century, at least 15 accidental deaths over the past 30 years appear to have been murders committed to protect Blackwood's secrets, Agent Chen had informed us. Environmental activists, investigative journalists, government officials who asked too many questions all eliminated by what we now know was a sophisticated assassination network. The media attention had been overwhelming. Our story had captured international interest, not just because of the treasure, but because of its implications. For American history and ongoing justice, historians were calling it the most significant discovery of Gold Rush-era corruption ever uncovered. While legal experts debated the precedent it set for challenging property titles, based on historical fraud, Sarah had handled the media circus with remarkable grace, giving carefully prepared statements that focused on our family's commitment to seeing justice served rather than on our personal experience. We never set out to uncover a criminal conspiracy, she'd told 60 Minutes during a segment that won a Peabody Award. We just wanted to save our ranch. But when you discover evidence of crimes that have hurt people for generations, you have a responsibility to make sure the truth comes out. The personal cost had been significant. For 3 months, our family had lived under federal protection, unable to return to our ranch while the investigation unfolded. Emma and Tyler had been enrolled in temporary schools under assumed names, a situation that had been particularly difficult for a tier-old Tyler, who didn't understand why he couldn't tell his new friends about his real home. "When can we go fishing again, Dad?" had become his constant refrain. A question that broke my heart every time because I couldn't give him an answer. But the most difficult aspect had been watching our ranch from a distance. Knowing that the federal investigation was dismantling, and examining every aspect of our family's life while we waited to learn whether we'd ever be able to return home safely. The breakthrough had come in October, when federal agents arrested the last members of the Blackwood assassination network. With the immediate threat eliminated, we'd finally been allowed to return to our ranch, though still under periodic security monitoring. The homecoming had been emotional beyond words. Standing in our kitchen again, looking out at Willowbrook Pond, I'd felt as if we'd been given our lives back. But I'd also realized that we could never simply return to our old existence. The discovery had changed us, our understanding of justice, and our responsibility to something larger than our own family's welfare. That's when the idea for the memorial had been born. "Jake," Sarah had said one evening as we sat on our porch, "what if we don't just put the pond back the way it was? What if we create something that honors the people who were hurt by the crimes we exposed?" Her suggestion had sparked conversations with federal investigators, historians, and ultimately with the families of people who had been victimized by the Blackwood conspiracy over the generations. What emerged was a plan that transformed our ranch into something unprecedented, a living memorial to justice that combined historical preservation with ongoing education and healing. The Willowbrook Justice Memorial had been designed by a team of architects, historians, and landscape artists, working in consultation with victim families and tribal representatives, whose ancestors had been among those murdered for their land. During the Gold Rush era, the memorial preserved the stagecoach in its original location beneath the pond, accessible through an underwater viewing chamber that allowed visitors to see the artifact in its natural context. But the memorial was more than just a display of historical artifacts. It included a research center dedicated to investigating historical and ongoing corruption, educational programs for schools and universities, and support services for families affected by political and corporate crimes. The federal government had provided significant funding for the memorial, as had the state of California and dozens of private donors who were moved by the story of justice, delayed but not denied. Most surprisingly, several of the California families whose ancestral wealth had been traced to the same corruption had voluntarily contributed millions of dollars to support victim compensation and historical education programs. "Some of us want to do better than our ancestors," explained Margaret Chen, whose great-great-grandfather had been among the corrupt officials documented in the Stagecoach Papers. "We can't undo the past, but we can help make sure this kind of injustice doesn't happen again." The memorial had opened to the public just a week ago, and the response had been overwhelming. Historians, students, journalists, and families from across the country had come to learn about the corruption exposed by our discovery and to pay respects to the victims of historical crimes that had finally been acknowledged. Standing at the pond's edge this morning, I could see through the clear water to the specially designed platform that preserved the stagecoach in its original resting place. Visitors could descend through the underwater viewing chamber to see the artifact exactly as we'd found it. While interpretive displays explained the historical context and ongoing impact of the crimes it had revealed, the gold from the strong boxes had been valued at $3.2 million. But rather than keeping it, our family had donated it to a fund supporting victims' families and historical preservation. The decision had felt right, despite the fact that the money could have secured our ranch's future for generations. The gold was never really ours, I'd explained to a reporter who'd questioned our decision. It was stolen from the people of California through fraud and violence. Returning it to serve the public good was the only ethical choice. Our ranch was indeed secure for generations, but through means we never could have anticipated. The memorial had brought international attention to our valley, creating ecotourism opportunities that supported our cattle operation while preserving the rural character we'd fought to maintain. Educational partnerships with universities had established our ranch as a research center for sustainable agriculture and historical preservation. Most importantly, the ongoing investigation triggered by our discovery had led to the recovery of billions of dollars in fraudulently obtained assets, much of which was being returned to affected communities and used to fund social justice initiatives throughout California. Danny had been promoted within the state water department and was now heading a new division focused on protecting water rights and investigating environmental crimes. His geological survey of our spring had become a model for sustainable water management throughout the Sierra Nevada region. My father's health had improved dramatically once the stress of our financial crisis was resolved. At 69, he was working with memorial historians to document generations of Morrison family knowledge about the land, contributing to research that was helping identify other potential sites of historical significance throughout the region. Had taken a leave of absence from teaching to serve as the memorial's education director, developing programs that brought students from around the world to learn about the intersection of history, justice, and individual responsibility. Emma and Tyler had adjusted to their new reality with the resilience of children, though both had been changed by the experience. Emma, now 13, had developed a passionate interest in investigative journalism and spent her free time working with memorial researchers to document family stories from Gold Rush descendants. Tyler, 9, had become the memorial's unofficial junior naturalist, leading tours that explained how the underground spring system worked and why water conservation was crucial for preserving both history and wildlife. "When can we go fishing again, Dad?" was no longer his constant question. Now, he asked, "Did you know that the spring system under our pond connects to 3 other water sources in the valley?" His curiosity about the natural world had been sparked by watching scientists study our land, transforming him from a worried child into an enthusiastic young researcher. The financial implications of our discovery had extended far beyond our family. The invalidation of fraudulent Blackwood land titles had resulted in the return of over 400,000 acres to public ownership, much of which was being designated as protected wilderness or returned to tribal management. Property values throughout Northern California had been affected as other historical land grants were investigated for similar fraud. Legal precedents set by the Blackwood case had triggered investigations into historical corruption in other Western states. Potential implications for millions of acres of land whose ownership had been assumed to be legitimate for over a century. Your family's courage in coming forward with this evidence has changed American history. Federal prosecutor Janet Martinez had told us, "We're not just prosecuting criminals, we're correcting historical injustices and providing closure for families who have waited generations for acknowledgement of crimes committed against their ancestors." The political implications had been equally significant. The revelation that one of California's most politically connected families had built their influence through generations of criminal activity had triggered investigations into current political corruption and campaign finance violations. Several state and federal officials had been implicated in ongoing Blackwood-related crimes, leading to resignations, arrests, and a comprehensive reform of political oversight systems. Victoria Blackwood herself had been sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole, convicted on charges that included conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, witness intimidation, and destruction of federal evidence. Her conviction had been the culmination of a trial that had riveted the nation and established new legal precedents for prosecuting historical crimes with ongoing impacts. During her sentencing hearing, she had finally shown emotion for the first time throughout the entire process. "My family built something that lasted for generations," she'd said through tears. "I was just trying to protect what we'd worked so hard to create." "What your family created was built on the graves of innocent people," Federal Judge Maria Rodriguez had replied. The Morrison family's courage in exposing the truth has finally brought justice for victims who have waited over 150 years for acknowledgement of the crimes committed against them. As I stood by the pond this morning, watching early visitors arrive for memorial tours, I reflected on how profoundly our lives had been changed by the decision to drain our family's most treasured landmark. We had faced financial ruin and made a desperate choice that we'd thought might destroy the heart of our ranch. Instead, we had uncovered a conspiracy that had shaped California history and exposed ongoing crimes that were still hurting people. The morning sun was climbing higher, painting the Sierra Nevada peaks with golden light and creating perfect reflections in the pond that once again harbored its ancient secrets. But now those secrets served justice rather than protecting criminals. The stagecoach that had been hidden for over 160 years was now a symbol of truth emerging from darkness, of evidence preserved against all odds, of justice delayed but ultimately served. Sarah joined me at the water's edge, slipping her arm around my waist in the gesture of partnership that had sustained us through the most challenging period of our lives. "Any regrets?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "About draining the pond? About uncovering the conspiracy? About everything that followed?" I considered her question carefully. Watching a family of deer drink from the far shore while their children played nearby, a scene that perfectly captured the peace that had returned to our valley. "No regrets," I said finally. We set out to save our ranch, and we did. We just didn't realize that saving our ranch would mean saving something much larger than ourselves. Emma and Tyler appeared at our sides, ready to help with the morning tour that would bring visitors from around the world to learn about the intersection of history, justice, and individual courage. Tyler carried his naturalist notebook filled with observations about the wildlife that had returned to the pond area since the memorial's completion. Emma had her camera documenting stories for the memorial's oral history project. "Are you ready for another day of changing the world?" Emma asked with the idealistic enthusiasm of a teenager who had learned that individual actions could indeed have global impact. "We're ready," Sarah replied, speaking for all of us. As our family walked toward the Memorial Visitor Center to begin another day of sharing our story and honoring the victims whose suffering had finally been acknowledged, I felt profound gratitude for the drought that had forced us to make an impossible decision. We had drained our beloved pond to save our ranch, but in doing so, we had discovered our purpose was much larger than preserving our family's legacy. We had become guardians of justice, protectors of truth, and witnesses to the power of ordinary people to expose extraordinary crimes. The treasure we had found beneath our pond had been more valuable than gold. It had been the evidence needed to right historical wrongs and prevent future injustices. The drought had ended, the pond had been restored, but the revelation it had brought would continue spreading its ripples of justice for generations to come. Our ranch was saved, our family was secure, and most importantly, we had played a part in ensuring that the victims of historical crimes were finally remembered and honored. The morning light danced across the water, where justice now lived beneath the surface, protected but no longer hidden, preserved for future generations to study and understand. The drought that had threatened everything we valued had ultimately revealed the most precious treasure of all, the power of truth to transform the world. One family's courage at a time, our story had begun with the desperate need to save our ranch. It had evolved into something far more significant, a testament to the truth that justice, like underground springs, may be delayed and diverted, but it never truly disappears. Sometimes it just waits beneath the surface for the right moment and the right people to bring it back into the light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.